Hey, Jack.
Hi, Carl.
Hello, hello.
Hey there. Jack, I just realized I had my sound turned off, so I don't know if you only said hi or if you asked me a question. But now I didn't hear whatever it was, but
You said hi.
okay,
Just said hi.
sounds good.
Sweet.
So we can, people probably will filter in for a few minutes. But is it Ben or Benjamin?
Ben, yeah.
Okay, cool.
And you're working on Y Source, or is that someone else?
That's someone else. Yeah, I don't think the Y source people have been here for a while.
Okay. So remind me which one you're working on?
My project is called How'd You?
How'd you? Okay.
Mhm.
Sweet.
So it's maybe the one that's spent the most time looking at connecting evidence with claims, I think. Not that I'm super far along, but I've got some functionality for recognizing whether a quotation appears, like textual quotation appears in a document. It's like a link that's referenced.
Mhm.
I've got a little bit of functionality for trying to construct a text anchor link. Hey, Marc Antoine. So you can like click and go straight to that page.
Okay. So essentially, like you got a quote, you take that quote and you want to link it to the actual place in the next or in a source, and so you push play on that.
Yeah.
Or sorry, you press the link and then it brings it up. That's what I meant to say, but
Yeah. Mhm.
sweet.
Is that what are you doing? Are you building your own system for there, or are you leveraging something like Hypothesis did all that up to a point?
Oh, you talking about mine? I built everything. I don't know that Hypothesis has like plugin architecture or anything like that, do they?
Yes. Well, I'm not sure what you mean by plugin architecture, but I've certainly been able to reuse Hypothesis code when I wanted to display a quote in context of a page. The good thing about Hypothesis is they actually did the heavy lifting to apply this to PDF also. So you can have,
yeah.
that is huge.
Because I was about to ask, because you can put the little squiggly lines and text colon, and then the text you want to show up in the page with Chrome, but that doesn't really work on PDF. And I was kind of curious if there's a solution to that.
There is, yeah. You can use, it's true, in Chrome, you can use expat with the content search to get show me this. You can actually use an expat as an argument. But yeah,
Interesting.
the making hypothesis run, like the problem with hypothesis is that if you want to create a quote, you'll want to do it on their using their browser plugin, which means it gets into their structures. So you're kind of dedicated to using their database. It's entirely possible, but non-trivial, to have your own version of the plugin where you change the server. And I've actually started down that path. I had my own hypothesis server running for a while. I think it's a bit rotten by now, but it means maintaining a separate version of the browser plugins, which is a bit ridiculous. So that means, okay, use the hypothesis server, which is not a huge deal. And I know that Society Library started doing that. Bentley did something for them that reads hypothesis and allows to import data from hypothesis into debate map. But I certainly like the fact that you can say, okay, let me show you how this looks in the hypothesis proxy. Like they have to actually proxy the page so that they can inject highlight the thing. But it's a lot of complex machinery that they've built and done and that we can use.
That's the lovely thing about computer science, just like using other people's software. But
So, did we want to have Benjamin kind of show us what he's been up to?
I'd be down.
Maybe do you want us to just say what we're all doing because you're new to the group and maybe we could go around the table a bit.
And I'd also be interested in that because Carl mentioned a little bit about how Drew's about. And
Yeah, my only concern, Marc Antoine, is that we may run out of time.
Of time.
so maybe
Yeah,
I start with what I'm doing and then we can go through afterwards, something like that.
I was going to say I could try to be very terse, but fair enough. I think that works as well.
All right, Benjamin. Cheers. All yours.
Go ahead.
Sounds good. I'll just share everything. And we'll go from there. All right. I'll try to keep the demo pretty straightforward. So here's the site, Logipedia. Like y'all, I'm trying to help create a Wikipedia for debatable topics. The main goal is to show the best of both sides on different issues. And it sounds like after talking with Bentley, we're all kind of doing it in different ways. And so I'll kind of dive into what probably sets apart what I'm doing. So we have the articles tab. Right now we have 2 example articles. And so I'll cover the student loan forgiveness page. And so this page was 85% auto-researched. And I use that word as opposed to AI generated because this isn't just asking GPT what the pros and cons of different things are. And I'll get into what that exactly means. But there are 3 main sections of the article, which is the context, covering just general overview information, a list of pros and a list of cons. Associated with each section is a summary, and this part is actually AI generated. It summarizes quotes that were auto-researched, and then a list of quotes. And so like this point matches with this quote, and that's where this data is summarized from, and you can go find the actual article from brookings.edu and find where the information came from. Similarly, with each pro or con, you can click into it. You have this AI summary section and then a bunch of quotes. And so there's a lot of information in this page, so I'll try to highlight some of the interesting parts that I was able to pick out. For instance, it was able to find that 65% of students graduate with loans between 20K and 39K, which was in 2018, and kind of just restates that kind of in longer sentence with a little bit more context. And so this was a useful, interesting fact from a .gov site, quote number 2. And you can dive into the actual quote and you can see a little bit more information, like the low for student debt was in Utah, and the high was in Connecticut. And then you can go to the actual source and see the study that this pulled this from, and you can go download the full text of the article and take a look at that. And so down here we have something similar. For instance, high cost of forgiving student debt. That's a very like the quick and dirty, and then we have a little bit expanded. The cost of forgiving all student loan debt would be extremely high and would require significant funding from taxpayers. And then we have the quick and dirty of each of the quotes kind of summarized in bullet point form here. Like, it's a historically large cost of government program. And so then you can zoom in, get a little bit more information. What does it mean for it to be a historically large cost of government program? And you dive into that and you see that that program would cost somewhere between 1.6 trillion and 373 billion, which would be more than the cumulative spending of many government anti-poverty programs. You can dive even one step further, go find that quote and read the whole thing and go to the source. And so that's kind of generally how it's all structured. And just trying to allow people to go as skim and surface level as they want, or as deep as they want, and get to the actual root material. And so now I can kind of cover what we actually did to create this. How does the software auto research it? But any thoughts on the structuring as of now? Because I'm especially interested just to hear like general feedback about anything that or just goods and bads, all of it. So I'll just
I like that you give context at the beginning. Pros and cons is classic. It's what everybody's doing. Jack and I often point out it's good to also have opening questions. Like, what are the things that broaden the question instead of a yes/no question? Thinking of not just opposing, but
so kind of like on Kialo, how there's a lot of like the pro-con section, but there's also some discussions that have like one step up that have like multiple answers, like a question, here are multiple answers, and each of those answers have there's pros and cons.
Well, that's yeah, but that is kind of upstream. What is important is when you have a yes/no, when you have arrived at a yes/no question and you're thinking if there's a yes/no question, it's a good place to remind people, oh, by the way, you could unask the question by opening it up in this way, that way, that way. If you consider this, maybe that's not the right question to ask.
Okay. And so that could be like a section at the bottom being like, consider these ideas.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And those
thoughts with the general structure.
Yeah, and Benjamin, for those pros and cons, do they go down it? And I saw that you can dig into that quote and stuff, but do they have supporting and opposing arguments to each of those pros and cons, or is it just one level deep?
At the moment, it's only one level, but you can imagine making articles recursively. We just haven't built that into the system as of yet. And so I'm hoping for there to be like a little button, which means is like zoom in, and then you get this page again, except for one of the pros and cons. Sweet. Then I'll go ahead. Or go ahead.
No, let's get into the how.
Sweet, the how. And so I can dive into code if need be, but I'll cover just very overview first to avoid getting into too many of the weeds. But generally speaking, we start with a claim. We just pop in the idea student loan debt should be, or whatever, what was it? The United States federal government should forgive student loan debt. So you pop that into the software and then press play. The first thing it does is it just scans the web. We have a number of search APIs that go and find the results from Google and just scholarly sources as well, and then parses them into text and creates a source object. And then, so we collect all those sources, and we then break those sources into paragraphs. A little bit imperfectly, but the general idea is like just to use the white space in a document to kind of break them into roughly equal chunks. And so the next thing we then go and do is find the pros and cons. And right now we're doing it very simple. We just ask GPT, give me a list of pros and a list of cons. Right now we have a volunteer helping out and creating claim identification. So you take a source, what's being argued for and against, and we'll use that to populate the actual pros and cons in the future. But once we identify those pros and cons, we just kind of make a giant loop and say for every pro and con, compare every single block from the sources, each of those paragraphs, and it asks, does this paragraph support this claim? Yes or no? And it says yes, no, or unrelated. We work to kind of get a prompt that does about 80% accuracy with that. We hope to increase that in the future. But at the end, what we're left with is a bunch of pros and cons, and then quotes that support each of those. Finally, at the moment, we have a human review, which is why 85% of the article was auto-researched. I just go through and realize, hey, it cited the works cited section. That's not useful. And I delete that block. Also like try to increase the usefulness of the summaries, because it likes to be very general with the summaries and not actually include some of the stats and figures. And so I go and kind of improve those. So all of that is something like there's plenty of room for growth to like make that more and more automated. But at that point, we kind of just display the content. And so I also created a little interface in a tool I use to interact with the database and allow me to like go through and make edits and use GPT to help summarize. So I can show you that. I could talk more about how this is actually done, but that's the very general overview. What are you guys' thoughts with that?
What was the part about the human picking out the pros and cons or the summaries?
So that's more, or I can kind of show you what that looks like. So we have a page here which has all the different articles. I can bring up.
Sorry, let me back up. What are we looking at? What is Coda?
Coda is the database hoster and what's showing the front end of the site.
It's a bit like Airtable.
Okay.
Yes, like Airtable, more like Notion. It's like Notion, but with the ability to run functions and buttons and a lot more. You can like essentially make Notion apps. That's what this is.
Cool.
And which has saved me a butt ton of time because I haven't had to touch UI software. I just let them do it for me with some cost of some constraints in the front end, but it's been worth it for prototyping. But for instance, I can go into high cost of forgiving student loan debt. And this is the con, which you're seeing right here. Those are the same data items. So it's just a row in a database. I can bring that up. And what we see here, or in this table, is one row for every single block of text that it picked up on. And so if I scroll down to some stuff that wasn't processed, for instance, we picked up this quote. What I can do is press a little button and it will make the main point and populate a title. It just pops up. And I can just read through this and be like, all right, was this main point actually useful? And oh, look, it mentioned $50,000. Do I want to put that number into the title? And so I go through here and like, it talked too much here. And then I throw 50K in here. And I didn't actually read the thing, so I can't say whether that's useful or not, or even this is relevant, but that's the general idea.
So this row is a source for like a pro or a con. Is that where we are in the process?
A paragraph from one of the sources for a pro or con.
Gotcha. That's cool.
And we can check out the actual source and see that data object if we want. We see that information here, but this is just a paragraph from it. Yeah, that's kind of where we're at. Any other questions related to all that?
Have you spent much time kind of prompt engineering how to ask the AI so that there's less kind of like human massaging, or have you not had a chance to do that?
I would say I've had a moderate chance. I definitely haven't, I'm not using the first draft of prompts I've done, but I've probably used like the 10th iteration for like relating the text along with creating the different or the summarization stuff. And so I haven't been able to test the summarization stuff, but I have some test data for the relation content. And it took about 8 hours to kind of like go through and like make sure that actually gets 80% accuracy. And we can probably improve that, but that's probably going to take like another 24 or something to like improve another 10% or something.
And you mentioned it tends to be kind of general, so figuring out how to get it to, even putting in the prompt, try to pull some stats if they're available and stuff like that. It's probably some improvements.
Exactly. So lots of things to kind of work with. And kind of what I'm trying to decide is like, where do I focus next? Should I be focusing on improving the software? If so, what parts of the software? Or should I be focusing on trying to create a business model around this so we can actually get it to grow? Which I think I'm leaning towards the second, depending on what the business model is. And I have some questions on that in a second. But any critiques for all this and like my general approach, ways to improve?
I mean, I would say two things. I think that, and I don't know if this is fair, but the having just one kind of layer of pros and cons, like you have a lot of quotes after that, but not having, okay, what's the reason why that pro is true, I think would be helpful. And then also, when you have a group of pros and cons, knowing which ones are more important. Now, all of that is debatable. It's not, I'm not even sure if an AI would help much with that. And that's actually where, my interest is. But I find that, I guess that's another good kind of question, is that, you have a finite number of pros and cons. Are you hoping at some point to be exhaustive and then choose what to show? So you might have every claim that any crazy nut has said on why that's not true. Or Or do you think it'll always be like, oh, I'm always going to keep it to 10 because no one's ever going to read beyond that?
To be determined. The grand vision is be exhaustive, everything every crazy nut has said. But then we have a rating, like a score for each one from like A plus, A, B, C, D. And so we only like there will be kind of an expand section to see beyond the first 10. But like ideally, everything that's shown by default is like of A, B, or A plus quality.
Yeah.
And everything else, like it's there, but like we don't try to highlight it, and we kind of put a disclaimer being like, this hasn't been validated.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting on what to decide on what to have on that initial show, and we've had conversations about that. One goal is to kind of show the things that are kind of truest or have the most evidence behind them. But the other goal is it's also important to show things if you're able to say that they're false. So it's actually, I don't even know if that's one of your goals. But if you're able to do that, then also having common misperceptions. So you almost want to show, one goal is to show the most popular meaning the most things that people would come up in their own head. Although I guess it's also good to really show things that are surprising to most people. So it's interesting because you kind of want to, you have like 2 or 3 goals on what you want to show in that initial showing. So that'll probably be one of our main discussions is what's the introduction to the content, because we're definitely going to have way more content than anyone wants to consume. If they open up a huge page, I mean, your page is already pretty big, but that could scare a lot of people off if it's not.
Brought down, and which is also part of the reason why I don't think AI will be able to do everything, because like the big thing, at least I found while I was trying to create a crowdsource aspect of this, is like that chicken and egg problem. We have to have content to attract people. Once we attract people, then we can ask people to make content. And if you don't have like a good ratio of that, then you're not going anywhere. This, like the software helps to create the content, and part of my goal is like get enough people using it such that we then can add that crowdsourcing aspect on it, and we can have people rate the different pros and cons as convincing or unconvincing, and whether they agree or disagree. And part of the ideal being bringing the things up to the top that people both find from both sides find convincing. So if you disagree and find it convincing, that's extra points, because that probably means you're actually thinking about it and not just being you disagree with me, it's stupid.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. Also, just a quick thought to talk about in the future is I have a character that I created and then abandoned called Goaliebot. And so the idea is that this is a gullible robot. It's saying what it's found, and it gives people an opportunity to correct it. So that, and then being gullible also means it'll probably believe what you say. So that's kind of a character that I think might make it entertaining to correct. But you have it's a really good point that kind of before AI came along, us getting to that exhaustive thing is just mind numbing, and you can't even pay people to do it for long. They burn out. So having this kind of AI shortcut looks like it is really gonna help us out a lot.
And what it also allows for is like I was trying to get people to write large like sections and paragraphs to like support, or and rather than these quotes. But this becomes very easy because people see something and they're like, oh, I should add that. They just copy it, click the little add button, and they pop it in. And that's yet to be tested, whether people actually do that. Yeah, that's stuff to figure out there. I guess I would be curious to kind of hear, or so unless you guys have other thoughts, which I'd love to hear what you guys are up to, and then also any ways that my tool might be able to help y'all. Just collaboration opportunities. But Carl, you had a thought?
Yeah, well, I had a question. Do you have a page that compares your tool to what you recognize as like similar tools? And I don't mean like, all of our tools, like how's it slightly different from this, tool that one person in our group's working on, this other one, not the niche ones. I mean, how does your tool compare to, say, someone writes spends a lot of time researching and writing, say like a Medium post or like a blog post, and then a social site, someone links it there, and the conversation, happens in the site. And I hope I'm making sense. Like right now, people go places to find and discuss information, and those places could be like Wikipedia, where there's been an editorial process. Um, they could be, Reddit or, some news aggregator, and some of the pros and cons and conversations happens in comments. And I'm curious, have you thought like, why would people choose to come here? And I don't mean that like, as a negative, like I don't see any reason why they would. I mean, I can definitely see possible reasons, but more like understanding your vision of how this will be different. To help understand like where what users you want to focus on and what features would be important to them. Does that make sense?
Yes. And I think you brought up a good point there, kind of how you phrased that. It's because it does depend on the user base. Like there's some people who will find some part of this more useful than others.
Mhm.
Right now, our default audience that we're focusing on are speech and debate students.
Mhm.
And if we're going down the build a newsletter approach, that's the group we're going to try to like go to speech and debate tournaments, kind of get thoughts or get people to sign up to the newsletter there, try to advertise on speech and debate Reddits and things like that. But what they're looking for is high quality quotes that they can use in debates.
Mhm.
And they and content that's related to the topics they have. And so because I'm paying attention to the topics they have, there's not people who are intentionally publishing on what they have that don't charge money. And so I can start to create an audience there. And because I can do it a lot cheaper than other people who are monetizing off of speech and debate research. And so essentially I'm giving them the research much faster, of higher or equal quality, and cheaper than other people who are making that research.
Cool. That makes sense.
So
Have
are
you
there debate
seen?
students currently, I'm sorry, Mark Antoine, are the debate students currently paying for topics?
There are people, or essentially there's a group called brief makers, or not a group, like there are people who make briefs. So these are brief makers. And what briefs are just kind of a page like this, except as a Word document, going through and they put down the claim and a bunch of quotes to support it, another claim and a bunch of quotes to support it, related to the topics that people are debating on that season.
And then people are paying for those?
Yes, or at least those groups are alive, which means they're making money in some capacity. I have not been able to find stats yet about what percentage of speech and debate students buy those, but there are people who buy them.
Interesting. I'd never heard of that. Sorry, Mark Antoine.
No, I was just curious if you were aware of ArgueFlow,
And
because they're also ArgueFlow is targeting the same demographics.
I feel like I've heard about them before, and I'm not sure, or so I should write that down.
You can find
Right.
Nick in our chat. You could probably ping him on our chat. It's like Nick
Yeah,
K.
Wait, is the creative argue flow within Slack or Slack?
He joined a couple of our meetings like a month or two ago. So he's in the CDL Slack. And then they have a, what is it called? Matrix chat that I think you can also find linked from their ArgueFlow pages that would get you in touch with them.
trying
Okay.
to get the site to load and having issues. I wonder if they're down. But there are recordings of what they showed in the past CDL meetings that would be worth seeing if you want
Okay.
to. Basically, what they've built is a very good kind of hybrid Postgres and some other vector database. They didn't go with PG vector. They thought it wasn't good enough. And that means that they can really do interesting, make sure that this argument is new by semantic embedding proximity and deduplication that way, as a way to build very much this kind of tool. One thing I'm noticing is a lot of us are building RAGs right now. It's research augmented generation. That's what you're doing up to a point. We saw a great demo of another tool that was doing more, here's a question and please give me a research report. I'll try to find the name. A lot of us are doing that. My personal interest is, well, one of my many personal interests is, can we abstract out the common infrastructure and make that into something we can all use, and then build whatever specific for different communities and different use cases, but with a common data model so we can share and build from that. That's right now, I've done something that is for Society Library. That is very much a tool where, again, we take documents, we extract claims, and we try to make clusters and blah, 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 blah. So there's, and the next step is making maps out of them. So there's a lot in common again. I'm trying to say, okay, what part of that, some part of this I'm building for the Society Library, for their use case, for their, being paid for it. So good. But I'd like to isolate, here's the open source part that we can all build on and all construct on, so that we can develop our specific secret sauce as a module, trying to build a modular, so that we can all benefit from one another's efforts as extra modules on a common substrate. That's my goal.
Because like for instance, one chunk that I could see easily taken off is like the URL to source. We create like a source object, or you pass in a URL, you create a source object, and like all the research requires like creating these source objects and like chunking them and things like that.
Exactly. That is common. That is obviously common. And being able to have a data model where we connect these, okay, here's a code taken from that subsection of that source object, and or maybe from many subsections sometimes, because sometimes the thing that makes sense straddles paragraphs, rarely. I haven't got that far myself, but it's a real use case for thinking of growing. But anyway, suppose it's one paragraph. So here you have a quote in paragraph, and then here are claims, and how does this claim relate to these paragraphs, to these quotes? So make that the common data structure, and we can all think about building those connections between quotes and claims and quotes and arguments, and argument as a common data structure we all use, and make that a common thing. And then the map making, well, will depend on the structure of the map. Society Library has its own map ontology. You have an ontology that is more influenced by debates. Jack and I are very much working on an IBIS structure, but I'm trying to, what I'd like, my personal goal is to have, argument is a generic term for a lot of very specific inference schemes. And there's a lot of things that are beyond inference schemes at a kind of higher level of granularity, which are more like almost storytelling schemes. And lower level granularity, the inference schemes contains frames such as actions and things like that, action schemes. And having all of these structures, having a library with all of these structures, so that we can start exchanging about these things. That's where I'm trying to go.
Yeah. And if you see anything from my software, or like just like from the flow I mentioned that you think would benefit from that, like feel free to reach out to me and we can go through and just like I can pass that code and we can kind of add it to, or like, do we have a GitHub for that by chance, like a common module?
I'm trying to, as I said, extract the work I did for Society Library, so there's a common substrate that can be used. It's not public yet, but it should be in a few weeks.
Okay. Because another thought from what I could contribute to that is like right now I'm essentially answering multiple choice questions on scale with GPT on text. And I could see that being useful in multiple areas. It's like, okay, I'm looking not just for pros or cons, but I'm looking for something that includes a stat or mentions this specific item or is humorous. I don't know. And you can pull that out and just say, all right, insert a prompt with multiple choice answers, and then return the things that match these different choices.
I think that having a prompt engineering library is absolutely valuable. It is part of what I've built, but right now it's very primitive ad hoc. You put prompts. What I'd like is to have the prompts be informed with and this is something unexplored for me, but there are multiple patterns, as I said, and support is one pattern, and as you say, multiple choice is another pattern. So is there a way to describe those patterns in general so we can use it as a starting point for many prompts or as part of the prompt instructions? This is where I'm going.
Because I guess my thought wasn't so much even just like have common or a prompt library that we've proven out, which would be useful, but more just like the structure for implementing those prompts. Because like all research is required, like going through documents, so that
Yep.
you can insert text, you take a prompt, and like repeating that prompt on a number of different texts. It's just like classification.
Yeah. That
Okay.
is there. That is part of the structure I'm building. Yes.
Okay. Sweet.
So that's my interest in general is federated structured conversations. Like, can we use that to build? Like, I build my map of my topic. You build your map of your topic. How can we combine those maps when we've done them, and make that the social scale decision support system? My interest is deliberative democracy, but that means I don't have a clear how should I put it? Business model. That's a problem, but I have a very much a social model of this. So that's what I'm trying to build. And I'm also, the last thing I'll say before I pass it on to others, I believe very much in the importance of multiple point of views, and that means a very complex view of truth. What is, it's something is considered acceptable by this community and not by this community. And I speak often of social truth. Something is, accepted, refused, controversial, divisive. These are all part of a richer truth models. And in a way, it's a kind of probability distribution. And the other thing is, I believe very much in going on an event sourcing basis, because we're speaking about language and people making arguments, and these are streams of conversations. So at the technological level, I'm basing it on event sourcing. And one more thing, then I'll really letting go, is something that's fundamental for me is structures to describe ambiguity. Because when you say something, people will understand it in many different ways, and making that explicit. I'm not there yet, but that's high on my agenda. Over. Well, I'll let others speak. Well, I'm working a lot with Jack Park here. One thing we're trying to do is to make a gamification out of people trying to make sense out of complex issues. And in the gamification process, we've thought a lot about scoring. So the whole question about saying, oh, we'll have a score on the arguments. Well, people can game the score. People like there is dishonesty in the score. So this is not simple. Scoring is not a simple issue. We've talked a lot about this in the CDL. How do you do scoring when you have social disinformation as a service?
And
I mean, we don't have solutions necessarily, but it's a
I
concern.
have some thoughts on that. I'm debating whether that's a tangent to go down. I guess one key word, and I won't go into all of it, but look up Metaculous, META, or are you familiar with it?
I
Or
think the name is familiar, and I'm trying to remember.
essentially, it's a forecasting platform. So people can
Yes,
forecast on
yes.
a certain percentage confidence that this event will happen or this event will happen, because the future is one of those weird things where you have these debatable arguments where you have these pros and cons, like this will happen or this won't happen, and then suddenly in the future you know or you don't know, it becomes obvious or not. And so that's one way to like measure for certain whether at least the end result, did the arguments lead to truth.
You're aware of Tetlock's work on forecasting?
Yep, just finished reading his book.
Okay, good. So yes, I have been thinking a lot about using forecasting scores as a way to have an informed kind of higher level of liquid democracy. Yes.
Awesome. And so it sounds like I've been able to hear what all you guys have done, because I talked with Bentley before about reason score. Unless there's more you wanted to mention there, Bentley.
No, I haven't had anything else. Did you get enough from Carl yet on how'd you?
And so maybe Carl, was there any big parts? So the big thing that you're trying to do is like connect quotes with essentially verify information online.
Well, I think that's maybe where I've spent the most time that other people haven't. I would say UI wise, I'm very similar to what's Steven's thing? Socrates. I have some nuances, the difference, but kind of like a hierarchy that like is sort of revealing and you're at a particular claim at any point. And then as far as motivation, I mean, every time Marc Antoine describes things, I'm always like nodding, like alternative viewpoints. Very few of these are represented in Howju, the prototype as it's deployed right now. But, how do you deal with ambiguity? How do you show people like yes, but, basically, step back and view things from a, wider or a different interpretation. The model I'm taking is, I guess I think of it as sort of propositional logic, where it's like there's something, we're assuming is the potential conclusion. And then, what are the potential arguments for that? So either they're constructed of like several other propositions that together make an argument where that's supposed to be the conclusion, or like an evidence-based argument where we say, this quotation from this source and like all the fuzzy things associated with that, a person judging authority and speaker and all that based upon the source and interpreting the quote, that that offered as evidence for the truth. So that's where my motivation and interest comes from with Howju. Yeah. Also like in context viewing of the quotations with a browser plugin. That was kind of my struggle with Hypothesis, Marc Antoine. Like maybe you've done more work with them to make it, work with like an app, but I was not aware. Like, so if I was going to use Hypothesis, I thought I could, identify runs of text or whatever quotations, and then they would show, when they were displaying that page with that run highlighted, they would show their sidebar of like, here's the highlighted text and here's the comment or note that the person left. And for me, a comment or a note is a very like feature unrich way to talk about.
Totally.
Yeah. So that's where I'm trying to add is that I'm trying to add that layer of, okay, what do you think the person's saying with this quote? What's the proposition? And then let's explore the arguments, for or against, or either that it's true,
No,
that it's false, that it's unknowable. Yeah.
I only think of using hypothesis as a way to crowdsource the gathering of relevant quotes. I certainly don't expect to do the display of the quote argumentation in the hypothesis tool. Though, I mean, basically, if you have a comment, the comment can contain a hyperlink to the tool, which will show the thing in context, which is what I'd expect to do. It would be possible, of course, to take like fork their browser plugin so that we put whatever we want in the view and still use their database as a kind of repository for a data structure with the relevant stuff and say, okay, here's the link for the thing in context, and here's a JSON with what we need to build our view, right? Or even the database could be, the link could be something that, if you get it, if you click it, you get a page, and if you do a JSON request on it, you get the content, and then we can play with it. But it shouldn't matter. That was not in scope for me. What I tried to do is use it as influx, and then I display things in my tool. But it's possible for me when I display things in my tool to say, here's the quote, and if you want to see it in context, click here, and then I can open in another tab the page with the hypothesis plugin loaded and highlighting the quote in context, which was good enough for my purposes. And of course, I could do that in a frame.
Carl, you've probably seen Fiskit. I just dropped a link in there. You've seen that, right?
I've definitely seen it before. I don't think I took notes on my thoughts on it, so I'd kind of
I don't know if it fits into what you're doing really well, but it does kind of have a document and have people kind of rating the statements made in the document. Not rating, but saying well researched, or say, they're giving some judgments, provably true, insightful, stuff like that. So I don't know if it's helpful, but it just your discussion made me think of it again.
Yeah, I need like a screenshot of Howju, but I mean, I think we have a recording of me demoing it a couple times ago. But the idea with Howju is not a document that Howju hosts, although that could potentially become a different type of feature, but like a document in the wild in your main view, and then you have a sidebar that's maybe like draggable that lets you see, okay, what is this user, what do other users say appear at different points in this document, and then what are the either like a summary of like 50% say it's true, if it's false, like we don't have to get into the details of good things to display, like obviously that's a very simplistic idea, and then diving into, okay, so this person says this is the statement that's being made here, let's say I agree. Okay, well, is it true or false? So I don't know. Like, I do think it's what this person's saying, unless I change my mind or someone has a sort of a, I don't have a word for this justification, but it's like this is, false because it should be interpreted as meaning something else. Like this interpretation is a poor interpretation, or this wording is a poor wording.
Jack,
Subtapped, in fact, too, they I feel like they didn't have a very strong branching, but I have to double check. They're all video, which is cool, because that's maybe more challenging than text in some ways, or maybe not. I don't know if you limit which video sources you do, but I don't think they let you like dive down into like, okay, this video says this, and then other users have already figured out that this thing's false and this thing contradicts this, so therefore this thing is false, and therefore this part of the video is false. Which I think a lot of us, that's kind of like, that's where maybe the canonical is coming from this group. I think a lot of us are drawn this group because we don't want to just be creating stuff off on the side. Like that's the thing that frustrated me with Reddit, a long time ago when I became interested in this problem, is that you'd constantly be saying the same thing, which has its value. Like sometimes you just have to repeat yourself and maybe you're not even being heard on Reddit. That's just one area, or maybe you are. But like if you're taking all this time to craft an argument, like why shouldn't that become like a reusable thing, where these are the reasons for proving this thing is true, and these things are all close enough to that thing that they're all worth viewing together, and therefore anytime you see any of those, here's the collection of arguments that are worth looking at according to our ranking and filtering and all that.
Jack, did you have something you want to talk about?
So it goes back to the to the hypothesis thread, but before I go there, I just wanted to make a comment on Reddit. Don't ever downvote somebody who happens to be a mod.
Why?
You'll lose your downvoting ability on that subreddit.
Okay, I've never.
Don't
So
do
they
it.
can see downvotes.
When you have a certain amount of karma, you get to downvote. And apparently the mods are the only people who get to see who did what. And there's a good reason for that. You don't want people to come back, and this, first of all, the system already knows you downvoted, so it's not going to let you keep doing it. But there was a bunch of really stupid comments in one of the subreddits that I've been in for quite a long time, and I just said that's wrong. And I downvoted it. And the next time I came in, I can't see downvotes anymore. The arrow's gone. And but on all my other boards, it's still there. So it wasn't system wide, it was subreddit, it was board wide. Okay, back to hypothesis. So order of magnitude 10 years ago, I got engaged with a bunch of people at Hypothesis. We were doing a study of Engelbart's life. And we did it in Hypothesis by running around the web, pulling in pages that had something to do with Engelbart. And it ended up, we got into conversations in the annotation app, so that when you opened a page in Hypothesis, you had a vertical column that was basically a chat room. It had all the annotations and the tags and the other stuff that you're allowed, but it also had conversations. So you could you could open a page in Hypothesis and see a conversation, jump right in and make more comments. And so I long thought that the right thing to do was to clone and mutate their JavaScript and put an IBIS object in there, so that the conversation was no longer a linear chat room, but it was an IBIS tree. I never got around to doing it, but I've long thought that the amount of horsepower there is in the Hypothesis client to have a real social network within the client around the topic that is this page. I think there's a huge amount of thinking that can go into that.
Mhm.
Over.
I wish I could do that too. I wish I could just put in my model. But I feel like I have to figure out what IBIS
You could.
compares. I could. I'm
I
very
mean-
nervous about just forking someone's like running app. Like there's things that people create that are meant to be reusable. Either an API where they say, this is an open API, we're not gonna unduly rate limit you or close it down, or this is a library we encourage you to use. But there's a difference between saying I'm cloning your whole app, which kind of your front end, and expecting that to work. I mean, it could work just fine. Maybe you're so successful that they're like, this is great. Or, oh, wow, this guy, wants to do a plugin architecture. Let's let him do it or her do it. And theirs will be the first. I didn't try very hard.
What I'm trying to say is Hypothesis is very modular, very well designed, very designed for contributing. I think you totally could fork the front end if you wanted to. It's totally viable to do so.
One of their goals was to create a shared system of some sort.
Yeah.
So they originally created it as a protocol. So that was kind of their goal. And so this is supposed to be one implementation. That doesn't quite fit what you're asking, but they did have more thought than most devs on reusability.
I'm a big fan of Hypothesis that way.
We've almost reached the
So-
hour. We might as well keep this on time. But Benjamin, there was a lot of topics that we enjoy discussing. So funding was something you mentioned, and then integration. Is everyone interested in having another funding discussion next week?
Funding?
Yeah, like for our own projects or to help Benjamin hear his thoughts on funding and, whatever experience we've had.
We've all
Zero.
had a lot of thoughts on funding for sure. We can certainly go on. I'm on
So
for that.
Carl, you're not interested in funding?
Oh, sorry. I mean, I've had zero. I have not tried to
Zero
fund
experience.
at all. Yeah. I mean, I'm just full of. All my ideas would be, baseless. But
Yeah.
I personally am leaning towards subscription, but I have not bothered to test whether anyone would find anything I'm doing useful or whether they would donate, a $2 a month subscription or whatever the case may be. But I know Mark and Antoine has had a lot. I think you have complex thoughts on everything, but different ways to monetize these things, I think are on your top of your mind.
But I'm afraid it's the same. I've had tons of ideas, but none of them really tested. But okay, one of the projects I worked on was a platform for extracting ideas from conversation as part of an open innovation project. So it was used by consultants. Consultants go in a company and say, "Oh, we'll run an open innovation process in the company and get all the employees and maybe other collaborators input, and make a map out of that of all the things you could do differently in your company." And they got big contracts and big money from big players. So that was a real market. One market I've been thinking about a lot is all the organizations whose role it is to speak on behalf of a lot of constituents. Think United Way. They have to speak for all these NGOs. Think professional orders. Think political parties. They have to represent accurately, or less true for political parties, but there's a lot of unions. They have to talk on behalf of others and they have to represent them well. So being able to check that they took into account all the elements of their constituents is something that I thought could have value. Jack has been thinking a lot about more public level funding, how to see it as a library and people paying to get access to collectively curated knowledge.
So we can tentatively have that as the topic for next week. And of course, I'm just throwing something out there to generate interest. So I'm sure he'd be happy with other stuff as well.
Next week is not a good week for me. So,
or actually, it'll be next month. We're now down to just once a month. I said the wrong thing.
which is fine. That I can live with that.
Although we can always do it more frequently. So if there happens to be interest, but I think everyone's pretty busy.
Yeah, anytime but next week.
Cool.
I would be down for next week or next month. I am making decisions, or I'll be experimenting with stuff. Having thoughts would be helpful. I'm already getting thoughts from other people though as well.
What about having an exceptional thing in 2 weeks, because that's closer to your production release and next week is out?
And I'd also be down with just meeting with people like one-on-one if that's good. But essentially, I'll give the quick 2 seconds. Like, I'm either considering doing a newsletter, in which case there's plenty of timeline, or the thing I'm currently about to do is I'm going to reach out to Ballotpedia, offer to do some work for them for free, which is to automate their research process. And with the idea being, I'm fairly sure if I can have the time it takes for them, for like their 30 researchers to do research, that would be a pretty clear way for me to be able to, one, get a job, and then ideally later be able to convince them to like start expanding the articles they have on different policies, the ballots, but also just on like general topics. And so that's kind of what I'm thinking, is like collaborate with them and then maybe even connect these two groups together. Because they definitely have content related to kind of what we've been thinking, but also different types of content, like what are candidates saying or not. So that's something I'm going to be experimenting with. If you guys have thoughts on that, I'd be down to meet one-on-one. If you have no thoughts, then no need to have a meeting. But that's kind of where I'm at.
Cool. So yeah, if you or Mark Antoine want to pursue a meeting next 2 weeks, then I'd say kind of post it in the Hangouts, and this link should work and then we'll just have to figure it out from there. But I gotta head on out.
Sweet.
Yeah, I think we should all leave. Ciao, ciao.
Thanks.
Y'all, thank you.
Thank you.